X-Men. Apocalypse assembled a diverse and highly talented ensemble cast, blending returning stars from the previous films in the rebooted X-Men timeline with new actors taking on iconic roles. This casting approach not only allowed continuity with earlier films, but also introduced fresh interpretations of beloved characters. The casting choices significantly influenced the film's tone, style, and reception. Each actor brought their unique background, experience, and sensibility to the story, enriching the cinematic universe with their individual performances. James McAvoy reprised his role as Professor Charles Xavier, continuing his portrayal from X-Men, First Class and X-Men, Days of Future Past. McAvoy, a Scottish actor known for his versatility and emotional depth, brought a sense of calm authority and intellectual gravitas to Xavier. Prior to his involvement in the X-Men franchise, McAvoy had gained critical acclaim in films such as Atonement, The Last King of Scotland, and Wanted. His role as Xavier allowed him to explore a more psychological and emotional side of the character, particularly in Apocalypse, where Xavier must confront both physical and ideological threats. This film marked a turning point in Xavier's journey, portraying his evolution from a hopeful idealist to a battle-hardened leader. McAvoy's performance, especially in emotionally charged scenes such as his mental confrontation with Apocalypse, added weight and depth to the story. His continued success in both independent films and mainstream franchises has been bolstered by his work in X-Men. Michael Fassbender returned as Eric Lehnsherr, also known as Magneto, providing one of the film's most emotionally complex performances. Fassbender, who first portrayed Magneto in First Class, had previously made a name for himself with powerful roles in films such as Hunger, Shame, and 12 Years a Slave. Known for his intensity and physical presence, Fassbender's portrayal of Magneto in Apocalypse delved into the character's grief and rage following the loss of his family. His emotional vulnerability made Magneto both a tragic figure and a formidable antagonist. The film provided Fassbender with opportunities to explore Magneto's morality and duality, adding layers to a character often defined by his opposition to Xavier. This role reinforced Fassbender's reputation as one of the most skilled actors of his generation, capable of balancing nuance with magnetism. Jennifer Lawrence once again appeared as Raven Darkholme, also known as Mystique. By 2016, Lawrence was already a household name due to her Oscar-winning role in Silver Linings Playbook and her leading performance as Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games series. Her return as Mystique was seen as both a continuation and a culmination of her character's arc, evolving from a conflicted outsider to a reluctant hero and symbol of mutant resistance. In Apocalypse, Mystique plays a more central and heroic role, mentoring the younger mutants and resisting the influence of Apocalypse. Lawrence's star power helped draw attention to the film, and her performance highlighted Mystique's internal struggle between survival and leadership. While Lawrence reportedly had mixed feelings about the physical demands of the role, particularly the blue body paint and prosthetics, she remained committed to delivering a grounded, emotionally honest performance. Her involvement in the franchise also helped elevate the visibility of female characters in superhero narratives. Oscar Isaac joined the franchise as the titular villain, and Saban Nur, better known as Apocalypse. Known for his transformative performances in films like Inside Llewyn Davis, Ex Machina, and A Most Violent Year, Isaac took on the challenge of portraying a godlike mutant with ambitions of reshaping the world. Under heavy prosthetics and makeup, Isaac brought a chilling, ancient intensity to the role, emphasizing Apocalypse's belief in survival of the fittest and disdain for modern society. While the role was somewhat limited by design and the character's presentation received mixed responses, Isaac's commitment to creating a mythic and intimidating presence was evident. This performance marked Isaac's entry into major blockbuster franchises, paving the way for future roles in franchises such as Star Wars and Dune. Ty Sheridan stepped into the role of Scott Summers, also known as Cyclops, portraying a younger version of the iconic team leader. Sheridan had previously earned acclaim for his roles in indie films like Mud and Joe, where his naturalistic acting style drew praise. In Apocalypse, Sheridan brought a blend of vulnerability and emerging confidence to Cyclops, portraying him as a teenager struggling to control his powers and find his place in the world. The film marked a significant shift in Cyclops' cinematic representation, presenting him not just as a soldier, but as a relatable, conflicted youth. Sheridan's portrayal laid the groundwork for further exploration of the character in future installments, and his involvement in the franchise elevated his profile, leading to roles in Ready Player One and other mainstream projects. Sophie Turner portrayed Jean Grey, a pivotal character in the X-Men lore. Known for her role as Sansa Stark in Game of Thrones, Turner brought a mix of fragility and latent power to Jean, capturing the character's internal conflict and psychic abilities. Her performance hinted at the immense force within Jean, foreshadowing her transformation into the Phoenix. In Apocalypse, Turner was tasked with establishing Jean as both a vulnerable teenager and a powerful force of nature. Her portrayal was grounded, emotional, and subtly intense, offering a fresh take on the character previously portrayed by Famke Janssen. Turner's casting helped bridge the X-Men films with younger audiences and demonstrated her range outside of television. Cody Smith-McPhee took on the role of Kurt Wagner, also known as Nightcrawler. His gentle, introspective portrayal of the teleporting mutant was a stark contrast to the more brash or violent characters, providing a moral and spiritual anchor to the team. Smith-McPhee, already known for his performances in Let Me In and The Road, brought vulnerability and charm to Nightcrawler, highlighting the character's innocence and faith. His depiction resonated with fans of the comics and offered a different energy to the ensemble, reinforcing the theme of acceptance and faith in the face of adversity. Alexandra Shipp played Aurora Monroe, known as Storm, taking on a role previously portrayed by Halle Berry. Shipp's version of Storm was younger, more rebellious, and influenced by the social instability of her environment. Her portrayal emphasized Storm's journey from a street-level survivor in Cairo to one of Apocalypse's Four Horsemen. Shipp brought strength and grace to the role, and though her screen time was limited, she left an impression that allowed for further development in subsequent films. Her performance offered a more culturally rooted interpretation of Storm and added diversity to the central cast. The younger cast members, including Lana Condor as Jubilee and Ben Hardy as Angel, also contributed to the world-building and generational themes of the film, even if their characters were not deeply explored. These casting choices reflected the filmmakers' attempt to bridge the established mythology of the original X-Men trilogy with a new generation of heroes and villains. X-Men: Apocalypse arrived at a pivotal moment in cinematic and cultural history. Released in 2016, the film existed within a broader context of a rapidly changing society, a shifting media landscape, and a world increasingly defined by discussions of identity, inclusion, and transformation. As the ninth installment in the X-Men film series, Apocalypse was not just another superhero movie, it was a cultural artifact reflecting the anxieties, hopes, and ideological struggles of its time. While it may not have reached the cultural penetration of some other superhero titles released that same year, it contributed meaningfully to ongoing conversations about representation, power, and generational change. The X-Men franchise has long been recognized for its metaphorical depth. Mutants, as depicted in the X-Men universe, are often symbolic of marginalized groups, be it racial minorities, LGBTQ+ communities, or people with disabilities. In 2016, these themes resonated powerfully amid a period marked by political polarization, civil rights protests, and the rise of various social justice movements across the globe. The timing of Apocalypse's release aligned with heated discussions surrounding identity politics, systemic inequality, and the struggle for civil rights in numerous countries, particularly in the United States. Apocalypse built on this symbolic framework by presenting its titular villain as an ancient, godlike figure seeking to destroy the modern world in favor of a new order. His philosophy of survival of the fittest, while echoing traditional comic book villain rhetoric, also mirrored real-world anxieties about authoritarianism, elitism, and the dangerous seduction of extremist ideologies. In a political environment where populism and authoritarian leaders were gaining traction globally, the character of Apocalypse could be interpreted as a cautionary reflection of how power can corrupt and how historical mythologies can be manipulated for personal or political gain. Additionally, the film explored generational change. Many older characters, such as Charles Xavier and Magneto, found themselves transitioning into mentorship roles, while a younger group of mutants began to come into their own. This dynamic mirrored a larger cultural shift, as millennials and Gen Z audiences started to take center stage in social, cultural, and political conversations. The rise of younger characters like Jean Grey, Cyclops, and Nightcrawler signified a handing of the torch, both within the narrative and symbolically in real-world generational dynamics. Audiences saw these newer characters as reflections of a more inclusive, emotionally open, and morally complex generation. Another important cultural aspect of Apocalypse was its visual presentation of diversity. While still falling short of full representation, the film featured a multinational cast and characters from varied cultural backgrounds. Alexandra Shipp's Storm, for instance, was depicted with an origin rooted in Egypt, and the film emphasized her African heritage more directly than previous iterations. Similarly, Nightcrawler's strong Catholic faith and outsider status represented another form of difference often underexplored in blockbuster cinema. These character traits, though not always deeply developed, reflected an effort to embrace diverse narratives and identities within a mainstream cinematic framework. The film also arrived at a time when superhero fatigue was becoming a commonly discussed phenomenon in popular media. With the Marvel Cinematic Universe reaching a fever pitch and the DC Extended Universe making bold but divisive entries into the genre, audiences were beginning to critically assess the messages, tropes, and formulas of superhero storytelling. In this context, X-Men Apocalypse served both as a continuation of a beloved franchise and a test of whether audiences were still hungry for mutant-centric narratives that blended action with allegory. Despite mixed reviews, the film's cultural presence was felt in several ways. Its trailers and promotional material became the subject of online discussion and parody. Memes featuring Oscar Isaac's heavily made-up Apocalypse circulated widely, sometimes comparing him humorously to characters like Ivan Ooze from the Power Rangers. These memes, while often poking fun at the film's aesthetics, contributed to its visibility in internet culture and highlighted how modern audiences engage with media through humor, satire, and remix culture. Additionally, the film inspired ongoing fan debates about continuity, canon, and character representation. Longtime fans of the comics weighed in on the film's interpretation of classic characters, leading to rich conversations in online forums, podcasts, and fan communities. This level of engagement underscored the cultural significance of the X-Men franchise as not just a series of films, but a participatory mythos that invited interpretation, critique, and co-creation from its audience. X-Men Apocalypse also subtly reflected society's fascination with apocalypse narratives, which were increasingly prevalent in films, television, and literature during the 2010s. This thematic preoccupation spoke to a sense of cultural anxiety about the future. Climate change, political instability, technological disruption, and global conflict were all rising concerns in public discourse. The film's depiction of a world-ending event and the rebirth that follows mirrored a cultural desire to confront these existential fears and imagine a path forward. On a more symbolic level, the film's final act, which sees the young mutants banding together to defeat an all-powerful tyrant, embodied the idea of collective resistance and solidarity. In an age where movements like Black Lives Matter, climate activism, and gender equality were gaining momentum, this theme resonated with younger audiences who were seeking stories of empowerment and social change. The film's emphasis on teamwork, loyalty, and self-discovery, particularly among its younger characters, aligned with real-world narratives about youth activism and the fight against oppressive systems. Interestingly, the film's release also coincided with a broader conversation about the future of the X-Men franchise itself. As Disney's acquisition of 20th Century Fox loomed on the horizon, there was speculation about how the X-Men might eventually integrate into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This uncertainty lent Apocalypse a kind of transitional significance. It stood as one of the last major entries in the Fox-led X-Men saga before the impending corporate reshuffling. As such, the film holds a place in cinematic history as both a continuation and an ending of sorts, capturing a moment of flux within the superhero genre. X-Men Apocalypse may not have sparked widespread political debate or revolutionized the genre in the way earlier entries like X-Men, First Class, or Days of Future Past had, but its cultural impact is still notable. It served as a reflective surface for the anxieties and aspirations of the mid-2010s, touching on themes of rebirth, resistance, and the fear of ideological extremism. Its cast and characters represented a step toward broader inclusion, and its story echoed the generational and philosophical battles being waged across society. The production of X-Men Apocalypse was a massive undertaking involving a complex network of logistics, creativity, and collaboration. As the third installment in the prequel trilogy following X-Men, First Class and X-Men, Days of Future Past, the film aimed to raise the stakes and deliver a grand, global threat within a superhero context. Directed by Bryan Singer, who had already directed multiple entries in the X-Men franchise, Apocalypse sought to blend the mythological elements of comic lore with the established cinematic tone of previous films. The behind-the-scenes story of its creation is a mixture of ambition, artistic experimentation, production challenges, and intense physical and emotional commitment from cast and crew. Principal photography for X-Men Apocalypse began in April 2015 and lasted through August of the same year. The bulk of filming took place in Montreal, Canada, where large-scale sets were constructed to represent locations ranging from ancient Egypt to Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Montreal had previously served as the base of production for Days of Future Past, and its versatile architecture and studio infrastructure made it an ideal location for the wide array of scenes required in Apocalypse. The production utilized soundstages at Mel's Site du Cinéma and also filmed on location in areas around the city, including Montreal's Olympic Stadium, which was used in scenes involving large-scale destruction. One of the key creative challenges in developing Apocalypse was bringing the titular villain to life. Bryan Singer and the design team had the task of reimagining Apocalypse, a character with deep roots in X-Men comic lore, while making him visually distinct from previous film villains. Oscar Isaac, cast in the role, underwent hours of prosthetic application each day to achieve the blue-gray, heavily armored appearance. The process was physically demanding, requiring full body suits, facial prosthetics, and intricate makeup that left little room for comfort or flexibility. Isaac later described the experience as both isolating and claustrophobic, particularly due to the weight of the costume and the limitations it placed on movement and expression. The design of Apocalypse was a topic of considerable discussion during production and after release. The original comic version of the character is imposing and often depicted with high-tech enhancements and alien elements. For the film, the designers opted for a more ancient, pharaonic aesthetic, inspired by the character's supposed origins in ancient Egypt. This decision was partly practical and partly thematic, aiming to tie Apocalypse's ideology of survival and power to a visual language associated with gods and emperors. The result was a costume and makeup ensemble that, while memorable, also drew mixed reactions from fans and critics. Creating the visual spectacle of Apocalypse required extensive use of practical effects, green screen, and digital enhancement. The production employed thousands of visual effects shots to render sequences, such as the worldwide destruction brought on by Apocalypse's powers, Magneto's manipulation of Earth's magnetic field, and Quicksilver's super-speed rescue scene. The latter was a particular highlight of the film's production. Building on the success of the Quicksilver scene in Days of Future Past, which featured the character running through a kitchen in slow motion to the tune of Time in a Bottle, the creative team aimed to outdo themselves with a more elaborate and emotionally charged sequence. For the mansion rescue scene, a combination of green screen, practical explosions, wire work, and high-speed photography was used. Actor Evan Peters, who played Quicksilver, performed several of his stunts with the help of harnesses and rigs, while other elements were shot in slow motion and digitally composited in post-production. The scene took nearly a month to shoot and required coordination between the stunt team, visual effects artists, and camera operators to achieve the seamless, balletic motion audiences saw on screen. The filmmakers also faced challenges in coordinating the ensemble cast. With a mixture of returning stars and new actors, balancing screen time and character arcs required careful planning. Director Bryan Singer worked closely with screenwriter Simon Kinberg to ensure that character motivations remained clear, even within the film's sprawling narrative. Singer, known for his meticulous approach, often reworked scenes on set to better fit the emotional beats of the story. His direction emphasized character-driven storytelling, even amid the large-scale action set pieces. Interestingly, Singer and the team approached Apocalypse not just as a conventional superhero film but as an epic with biblical and mythological overtones. This creative choice influenced everything from the film's score to its visual symbolism. Singer frequently referenced religious and historical texts when discussing the character of Apocalypse and his vision of cleansing and rebirth. This lent the film a darker and more spiritual tone, which was reflected in the production design and cinematography. Several key sets were constructed from scratch, including the underground Cerebro Chamber, Apocalypse's ancient temple, and the destroyed remains of Xavier's mansion. These sets were crafted with immense detail and were often designed to allow for camera movement that could enhance the scale of the scenes. Production designer Grant Major, known for his work on the Lord of the Rings trilogy, brought a sense of grandeur and antiquity to the film's key locations. His work was particularly notable in scenes set in ancient Egypt, which involved massive statues, hieroglyphics, and towering monoliths. Makeup and costume departments also played a vital role in the film's behind-the-scenes story. Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique makeup process was streamlined from previous films, using a special bodysuit instead of full-body paint to reduce application time and skin irritation. This change allowed Lawrence to focus more on performance and less on the physical discomfort she had experienced in prior installments. Sophie Turner, Alexandra Shipp, and Ty Sheridan also underwent physical transformations for their roles, including hair dye, colored contact lenses, and custom-fitted costumes that reflected both their mutant identities and the film's 1980s setting. Speaking of the 1980s, the film leaned into the decade's aesthetic through its wardrobe, production design, and soundtrack. Costume designer Louise Mingenbach, a longtime collaborator on the X-Men series, blended comic book inspirations with period-specific styles to create a look that was both nostalgic and stylized. The result was a world that felt slightly heightened, matching the operatic tone of the narrative. Despite the scale of the production, the filming was not without complications. Weather delays, reshoots, and the physical toll on actors working with prosthetics and stunt equipment all contributed to the pressure of completing the film on schedule. Additionally, with a large number of key scenes involving visual effects, much of the film's final shape was determined in post-production. Editors John Ottman and Michael Lewis Hill had the task of weaving together multiple storylines while maintaining a coherent pace and emotional arc. Ottman, who also composed the film's score, was deeply involved in shaping the rhythm and tone of the movie from both a visual and auditory perspective. X-Men: Apocalypse tells a sprawling, ambitious story that attempts to weave together ancient mythology, modern-day political concerns, and personal emotional arcs through the lens of the X-Men universe. The film's narrative structure is shaped by its ensemble cast and multiple character journeys, and it follows the classic three-act storytelling format while incorporating flashbacks, parallel plot lines, and a climactic convergence of multiple story threads. The structure is dense, often nonlinear in its emotional focus, and strives to balance world-threatening stakes with deeply personal dilemmas. The film opens with a prologue set in ancient Egypt, thousands of years before the events of the main story. In this sequence, the audience is introduced to En-Sabah-Nur, later known as Apocalypse, the world's first mutant. This godlike being is worshipped by many, but feared by others. He undergoes a ritual transfer of consciousness into a new, stronger body, gaining the ability to absorb powers from other mutants. The ceremony is interrupted by a rebellion, and Apocalypse is buried beneath a collapsed pyramid, entering a state of suspended animation. This opening scene serves as a mythological foundation for the story, establishing both the antagonist's origin and the concept of mutant power as divine and ancient. Following the prologue, the film transitions to the early 1980s, 10 years after the events of Days of Future Past. The first act is devoted to reintroducing the main characters and setting up the status quo of the world. Charles Xavier now runs a thriving school for young mutants, embracing his role as teacher and mentor. Eric Lehnsherr, having escaped public view after the events in Washington, is living a quiet life in Poland under an alias, with a wife and daughter. Raven, better known as Mystique, has become a rogue mutant hero, freeing enslaved mutants and avoiding fame. Meanwhile, Moira MacTaggart, a CIA agent and former love interest of Xavier, investigates signs of cult activity in Cairo, which leads to the awakening of Apocalypse. The reawakening of Apocalypse marks the first major turning point of the story. His resurrection is visually dramatic and symbolically significant. Disoriented by the modern world, Apocalypse begins to recruit followers, known as his Four Horsemen, by amplifying their powers and manipulating their emotions. He first meets Storm, a young street thief in Cairo, and enhances her electrical abilities. Later, he recruits Psylocke and Angel, and finally Magneto, whom he finds in a state of emotional devastation after the death of his family. Apocalypse appeals to Magneto's pain and disillusionment, transforming him into his most powerful horseman. This sequence of recruitment scenes forms a kind of dark mirror to Xavier's school, where mutants are nurtured and taught compassion. In contrast, Apocalypse offers vengeance, strength, and domination. Simultaneously, new young mutants are introduced. Scott Summers, a teenager struggling with uncontrollable optic blasts, is brought to the school by his brother, Alex Summers Havoc. There, he meets Jean Grey, a telepath and telekinetic with immense untapped power. Kurt Wagner, or Nightcrawler, is also rescued and brought into the fold. These character introductions establish a new generation of X-Men and form the emotional core of the film's second act. Each of them faces the challenge of accepting their powers and learning to control them, a recurring theme throughout the series. The middle of the film is devoted to character development and rising tension. Apocalypse begins to enact his plan to destroy and rebuild the world. He taps into Professor Xavier's psychic abilities via Cerebro, attempting to control every mind on Earth. Xavier resists but is captured and taken by Apocalypse, who plans to transfer his consciousness into Xavier's body to gain his telepathic powers. This plot device raises the stakes considerably, as Xavier represents not only a strategic advantage, but also the moral center of the X-Men. One of the standout sequences in the second act is the mansion explosion and the subsequent rescue of its inhabitants by Quicksilver. This moment provides both comic relief and emotional impact. Quicksilver, aware that Magneto is his father, arrives at the school just in time to save the students from a deadly explosion caused by an attack. The scene is executed in slow motion, highlighting his speed and creativity while emphasizing the innocence of the young mutants and the fragility of their safe haven. Following Xavier's abduction, Raven, Beast, Quicksilver, and the younger mutants unite to form an improvised rescue team. This marks a significant narrative shift from passive survival to active resistance. The group travels to Egypt, where Apocalypse has created a pyramid-like structure as the site for his consciousness transfer. Meanwhile, Magneto, under Apocalypse's influence, manipulates the Earth's magnetic fields, causing global devastation. These moments serve as the emotional and thematic climax of Magneto's arc. He is caught between the pain of his losses and the humanity he once sought to protect. The film's final act centers around the climactic battle in Cairo. This battle is structured as a series of simultaneous confrontations. Magneto creates massive destruction as Xavier and Apocalypse clash on both a physical and psychic level. Jean Grey, whose powers have been hinted at throughout the film, is finally unleashed in full force. With encouragement from Xavier during a psychic confrontation, she taps into the Phoenix Force, obliterating Apocalypse in a fiery burst of energy. This moment is both a literal resolution to the battle and a symbolic awakening of Jean's true potential. It marks the film's final major turning point and signals the thematic conclusion of the story. The old world, represented by Apocalypse and his ideology, must be replaced by a new generation willing to lead with empathy and understanding. The denouement of the film focuses on restoration and preparation. Xavier rebuilds his school, now with a renewed sense of purpose. Magneto, having once again shifted away from villainy, departs quietly, leaving his future ambiguous. Raven, having rejected Apocalypse's tyranny, assumes the role of mentor to the young X-Men. The final scene sees the new team, Cyclops, Jean, Nightcrawler, Beast, and Quicksilver, training in the Danger Room, symbolizing their readiness to protect a world that fears them. Structurally, X-Men, Apocalypse is a classic ensemble epic, weaving together multiple character arcs with a central thematic throughline. The film employs several parallel narratives: Xavier's internal struggle with power and peace, Magneto's descent into darkness and eventual redemption, Raven's evolution from loner to leader, and the younger generation's coming-of-age journey. These storylines converge in a third act that emphasizes teamwork, sacrifice, and awakening. One of the film's more unique narrative techniques is its blending of myth and science fiction. Apocalypse's godlike origins, his ancient Egyptian setting, and his belief in mutant supremacy introduce mythological motifs that contrast with the grounded, personal struggles of the protagonists. This duality allows the story to operate on both intimate and epic levels, though it also leads to tonal shifts that some viewers found disorienting. The film frequently switches from personal drama to large-scale destruction, which contributes to a pacing that feels uneven at times. X-Men: Apocalypse is more than just a visual spectacle or another entry in the ever-growing canon of superhero films. Beneath its layers of action and special effects lies a tapestry of themes and symbolic motifs that connect the narrative to real-world ideas, human emotion, and cultural archetypes. While some of these themes are explicit in the dialogue and plot, many are expressed more subtly through imagery, character choices, and narrative structure. The film's exploration of power, rebirth, identity, mentorship, and ideology speaks not only to the mutant mythology that has always defined the X-Men franchise, but also to broader human concerns about who we are, what we believe, and how we survive in times of great change. At its core, the central theme of X-Men, Apocalypse, is transformation. This applies to both the world at large and to the individual characters. Apocalypse himself represents a literal and metaphorical force of transformation. His belief in the survival of the fittest and his desire to tear down modern civilization is rooted in an ideology that sees destruction as a necessary precursor to rebirth. This echoes historical patterns in which revolutionary figures or oppressive leaders claim to destroy in order to rebuild. Apocalypse's character symbolizes extremism taken to the highest level. He doesn't simply want to control the world. He wants to erase its current form entirely and replace it with one shaped by his own ideology. This reflects a broader theme about the danger of unchecked power and radicalism. Magneto's journey further reinforces the theme of transformation. His life is once again destroyed by prejudice and fear, and in his grief, he chooses to embrace violence and join Apocalypse. The symbolism here is poignant. Magneto's return to anger is not just a personal relapse, but a metaphor for how trauma can resurface and consume individuals if not confronted with compassion and support. His arc serves as a cautionary tale about how pain and isolation can make even the most principled individuals susceptible to extremist ideologies. However, by the end of the film, Magneto chooses redemption, helping to rebuild rather than destroy. This act of rebuilding after destruction symbolizes hope, change, and the possibility of healing. The theme of rebirth also plays a significant role. Apocalypse's name and powers directly suggest death and resurrection, and the film plays with this motif constantly. From the crumbling pyramid in the opening scene to the literal rebuilding of Xavier's school in the closing moments, the film presents a cycle of death and renewal. This cycle can be viewed as a metaphor for history itself, the rise and fall of civilizations, the collapse and reinvention of ideologies, and even the renewal of the X-Men franchise, which with this film introduced a new generation of mutants. Jean Grey's character embodies this theme more directly than any other. Haunted by visions and struggling to control her immense psychic powers, Jean symbolizes untapped potential and the fear of one's own abilities. The Phoenix Force, which emerges during the final battle, is the ultimate symbol of destructive rebirth. In mythology, The phoenix is a bird that dies in flames only to be reborn from its ashes. Jean's unleashing of this power destroys Apocalypse and saves the team, but it also hints at future chaos. Her transformation is both triumphant and foreboding, encapsulating the double-edged nature of power. Power itself is a dominant theme explored in multiple layers. Apocalypse seeks ultimate power to dominate and reshape the world. His ability to enhance others' powers serves as both a temptation and a corruption. He finds broken or insecure mutants, Storm, Angel, Psylocke, Magneto, and gives them more strength, but at a cost. In each case, the offer of power is tied to emotional vulnerability. Apocalypse becomes a symbol of false empowerment, a figure who promises greatness but strips away autonomy and moral clarity. This is a direct commentary on how charismatic leaders can manipulate the broken or disenfranchised into becoming instruments of their will. The contrast between real empowerment and corrupted power is most visible in the relationship between Xavier and Apocalypse. While Apocalypse believes in domination and control, Xavier believes in education, empathy, and understanding. The film sets them up as philosophical opposites. Apocalypse wants to take away free will in order to reshape society in his image, while Xavier fights to preserve individuality, freedom, and peace. This conflict reflects larger ideological battles present throughout history: tyranny versus democracy, fear versus hope, and dogma versus progress. Mentorship is another key theme, especially in the way older characters interact with the younger generation. Charles Xavier serves as a literal teacher, but also as a spiritual and moral guide. His school is not just a place to learn how to control powers, but a sanctuary where young mutants can discover who they are. His nurturing relationship with Jean, in particular, highlights the responsibilities of mentorship. He believes in her even when she is afraid of herself, and his trust allows her to step into her full potential. Raven's evolution also reflects this theme. Once a lone operative, she now returns to the school not just to help, but to lead. Her final speech to the young X-Men symbolizes the passing of the torch and acknowledges that leadership often means teaching others to believe in themselves. Identity, a long-running theme in X-Men stories, is strongly emphasized in Apocalypse. Each character faces an internal battle to understand and accept who they are. Scott Summers struggles with the responsibility of his destructive powers. Jean fears what she might become. Kurt Wagner battles his appearance and religious identity. Raven, who can shapeshift, has always symbolized fluid identity and the tension between appearance and essence. The film continues to use mutants as metaphors for marginalized groups, those who are feared because they are different, and who must either assimilate, hide, or fight to be accepted. This message resonates particularly strongly with audiences from communities who experience discrimination or identity-based persecution. Apocalypse's ideology, that the weak should perish and the strong should inherit the earth, stands as a direct rejection of the values that Xavier and the X-Men hold dear. In this way, the film becomes a parable about the importance of diversity, compassion, and coexistence. The symbolic contrast is sharp. Apocalypse surrounds himself with destruction, ancient monuments, and death. The X-Men, in contrast, surround themselves with youth, education, and life. The final confrontation is not just physical, but philosophical. The defeat of Apocalypse is the defeat of an ideology that sees difference as something to be erased rather than embraced. X-Men. Apocalypse stands as one of the most visually ambitious entries in the X-Men franchise, embracing a bold and expansive visual language that reflects its mythic scope, complex themes, and the supernatural scale of its antagonist. The film's visual style is a mixture of operatic grandeur, 1980s aesthetics, comic book imagery, and dark fantasy, woven together through cinematographic choices that range from sweeping wide shots to tightly focused emotional close-ups. Cinematographer Newton Thomas Sigel, who has worked on previous X-Men films, brought a cinematic sensibility to the project that aimed to balance intimacy and spectacle, subtle emotion, and visual bombast. One of the first visual decisions that sets the tone for the film is its opening sequence in ancient Egypt. These early scenes are bathed in golden hues and dramatic contrasts, invoking a sense of antiquity, mysticism, and ritual. The use of warm, sand-drenched tones and backlighting evokes the grandeur of mythological epics, while symmetrical compositions reflect the orderly, hierarchical worldview that Apocalypse seeks to enforce. As the pyramid collapses, the film's visual language shifts abruptly to chaos, dust clouds, crumbling stone, kinetic movement, suggesting the destabilization of an old world order. This early example foreshadows the visual approach of the rest of the film, equilibrium disrupted by immense, often supernatural forces. The transition to the 1980s is marked by a clear visual shift. Production design and cinematography embrace the decade's color palette, vibrant neons, soft pastels, denim blues, and muted grays. The fashion, vehicles, and environments all reflect the era, without becoming cartoonish, and the color grading helps root the film in a slightly heightened reality that feels consistent with the tone of superhero storytelling. Scenes set at Xavier's school are warm, brightly lit, and inviting, using natural light and gentle camera movement to create a sense of security and openness. These choices help define the school as a sanctuary, a safe space in contrast to the dark, shadowy environments associated with Apocalypse and his horsemen. The cinematography in the film's action sequences is particularly striking. One of the standout examples is the Quicksilver rescue scene, in which he saves students from a mansion explosion. This sequence is presented in slow motion, with the camera gliding around Quicksilver as he zips through rooms, interacting with falling debris, flames, and other characters frozen in time. The use of high-speed photography and digital manipulation creates a balletic rhythm, emphasizing grace and humor over violence. Siegel's camera avoids traditional action tropes here. Instead of fast cuts and shaky movement, the scene is controlled, fluid, and visually playful. The lighting in this sequence is cool and pastel-toned, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere, while the chosen music track, Sweet Dreams by Eurythmics, underscores the surreal, tongue-in-cheek tone. By contrast, Apocalypse's recruitment scenes are darker and more dramatic in both lighting and framing. When he approaches Storm in Cairo, the colors are desaturated, shadows dominate the frame, and the camera uses low angles to make Apocalypse appear godlike and imposing. The manipulation of light in these scenes helps reinforce the thematic idea of Apocalypse bringing darkness wherever he goes. The same technique is used in the later sequence, where he enhances Magneto's powers. Set in Auschwitz, the scene is muted and emotionally charged, with overcast skies, heavy shadows, and bleak compositions that echo the sorrow and anger Magneto feels. The cinematography does not shy away from the weight of this moment, using long shots and minimal movement to let the emotion speak through the visuals. The climactic battle in Cairo is a major showcase of visual effects and large-scale cinematography. Set against a digitally enhanced, partially destroyed cityscape, the sequence features elaborate CGI, vivid lighting contrasts, and sweeping camera movements. The framing shifts rapidly between wide shots of citywide devastation and close-ups of individual characters grappling with their inner demons. Siegel and director Bryan Singer opted to shoot many elements with practical lighting on set, using green screens only to extend or enhance environments, rather than replace them entirely. This choice lends a sense of physicality to the battle, grounding the fantastical elements in a recognizable reality. One of the most visually symbolic moments in this battle is the psychic confrontation between Charles Xavier and Apocalypse. Taking place within a mental landscape that mirrors Xavier's subconscious, the scene presents a minimalist version of the destroyed mansion, its walls stripped away to reveal a boundless, stormy sky. The use of scale here is deliberate. Apocalypse grows in size, towering over Xavier in the psychic realm, representing his overwhelming presence and ambition. Xavier, by contrast, remains human-sized but stands firm, visually reinforcing the film's belief in the strength of mind and moral conviction over brute force. Jean Grey's final unleashing of the Phoenix Force is another visual highlight. Her transformation is presented through flames, intense red and orange hues, and energy distortions that ripple through the air. The framing centers her as a divine figure, floating, arms extended, hair flowing, reminiscent of Renaissance depictions of angels or gods. The lighting emphasizes her power but also her clarity and self-control, in contrast to Apocalypse's chaotic and domineering presence. This moment is not just a climax in narrative terms, but a visual metaphor for awakening, empowerment, and transcendence. Throughout the film, Siegel's cinematography makes strong use of contrast, not just between light and dark, but between scale and intimacy. Large action scenes are punctuated with close, emotionally grounded moments. For example, when Magneto loses his family, the camera lingers on his face, avoiding spectacle in favor of raw emotion. The handheld camera work in this sequence increases a sense of immediacy and loss, pulling the viewer directly into Eric's world. Later, during Xavier's conversations with Jean or Moira, the framing tightens, the background softens, and the lighting becomes warm and natural, reflecting vulnerability and connection. Camera movement in the film is used to create momentum and tension. Tracking shots are often employed during character introductions, drawing viewers into the environment alongside the characters. When Storm is first introduced, the camera moves swiftly through the alleyways of Cairo, matching her speed and agility. In action sequences, the camera often orbits characters to enhance a sense of chaos or energy. However, Singer and Siegel avoid excessive cuts and overly kinetic movement, aiming instead for visual clarity and coherence, a welcome contrast to the disorientation common in some contemporary action films. The color grading of the film contributes significantly to its mood and thematic undertones. Muted colors dominate scenes of suffering or villainy. Grays, dark blues, and blacks fill Apocalypse's lair and scenes of destruction. Meanwhile, scenes at the school or among the X-Men are warmer and more saturated, using blues, golds, and soft greens. The film also uses bursts of color strategically, such as the blinding white light during Xavier's psychic confrontation, or the glowing energy effects during the final battle, to punctuate moments of transformation. The auditory landscape of X-Men, Apocalypse plays a crucial role in shaping the film's tone, heightening its emotional beats and amplifying its large-scale action. While much of the public and critical attention surrounding superhero films tends to focus on visuals and storytelling, the soundscape, comprising the score, sound design, and use of licensed music, is an often overlooked yet integral part of the cinematic experience. In Apocalypse, sound is used not just for atmosphere, but also for narrative propulsion, character definition, and thematic reinforcement. From the thunderous presence of its villain to the nuanced emotional cues of its heroes, the film's audio elements work cohesively with the visual and narrative to construct a fully immersive world. The musical score for X-Men, Apocalypse, was composed by John Ottman, a longtime collaborator of director Bryan Singer. Ottman holds the unique dual role of both editor and composer on many of Singer's films, including earlier entries in the X-Men series. This dual capacity allows Ottman to weave music and image together with a level of synchronization that is often difficult to achieve when separate individuals fill those roles. His experience editing the film gave him direct insight into pacing, tone, and rhythm, insight that heavily influenced how the music was composed and placed. Ottman's score for Apocalypse is sweeping, dramatic, and thematically complex. The soundtrack frequently leans into orchestral arrangements with choral backing, invoking a sense of grandeur and spiritual significance, especially in scenes involving Apocalypse himself. The main theme for the titular villain is built around deep, slow-building motifs that incorporate both brass and percussive elements, often accompanied by Gregorian-style chanting or droning vocals. This use of vocal sound gives Apocalypse a religious, almost cult-like aura, emphasizing his identity as a self-proclaimed god. The theme is not fast or aggressive, but rather looming and inevitable, echoing the character's belief in destiny and natural selection. This deliberate pacing mirrors his slow but destructive influence throughout the film. In contrast, the musical cues for the X-Men are more varied, reflecting the different personalities, powers, and emotional arcs within the ensemble cast. Xavier's theme is gentle and contemplative, often built on strings and piano, reflecting his wisdom, compassion, and internal struggles. Jean Grey's theme is more restrained, mysterious, and slightly melancholic, which becomes more dynamic and fiery toward the film's climax, reflecting her awakening power. Quicksilver scenes are treated differently altogether, incorporating licensed music in a way that contrasts humor and style with the seriousness of the surrounding world. The most memorable example of licensed music in the film is the use of Sweet Dreams Are Made of This by Eurythmics during the Quicksilver Mansion rescue sequence. As the mansion explodes in slow motion, Quicksilver moves at super speed, rescuing students and redirecting projectiles with effortless cool. The choice of music here is both ironic and stylish, providing an emotional release and levity in a film that is otherwise dark and intense. This use of a recognizable pop song works in tandem with the sound design. Fire crackles, debris hisses through the air, and muffled explosions fade into the background as the music takes center stage. The result is a balletic, almost operatic scene that relies as much on sound as it does on visuals. Elsewhere in the film, licensed music is used sparingly but effectively to evoke the 1980s setting. The inclusion of era-appropriate tracks, subtle though they may be, helps place the viewer in the time period without resorting to over-the-top nostalgia. The blending of synthesized music and orchestral cues also subtly reflects the clash between the modern and the ancient, one of the film's central thematic tensions. Apocalypse, with his ancient ideologies, is met by a world filled with technology, mutants, and modern morality, and the film's soundscape often mirrors this clash through contrasts in instrumentation and tonality. The sound design in Apocalypse is meticulously crafted to enhance the film's scale and intensity. Every power, whether psychic, elemental, or physical, is given a distinct sonic signature. Magneto's manipulation of metal is accompanied by deep, reverberating metallic groans that evoke both power and agony. His scene in Auschwitz, when he channels the magnetic force of the earth, is filled with low-frequency rumbles and vibrating pulses that seem to resonate through the bones, suggesting the gravity of his transformation and the cataclysmic potential of his powers. Apocalypse's own abilities are rendered with an auditory style that emphasizes weight and dimensionality. When he manipulates matter or disintegrates enemies, the sound is not just explosive but layered, multiple textures of rumbling, crackling, and echoing that suggest ancient, unearthly forces. His voice is sometimes modulated to sound deeper, more resonant, particularly during his sermons to his horsemen. These subtle enhancements underscore his otherness, separating him sonically from the rest of the characters. Sound design is also used effectively during moments of psychic combat. In scenes where Xavier enters mines or uses Cerebro, the sound becomes more abstract and ethereal. The score drops into the background, replaced by reverb-heavy tones, whispers, and distorted echoes that evoke a dreamlike or nightmarish quality. These sequences often rely on silence or near silence to build tension, with abrupt bursts of sound signaling mental intrusions or confrontations. The psychic duel between Xavier and Apocalypse in the film's climax features sharp, percussive stings each time Xavier is thrown or dominated, while the ambient noise of the crumbling mental landscape mirrors the crumbling stakes of the real-world battle. Dialogue in the film is also mixed with care, particularly given the wide range of characters and accents. Apocalypse's voice is slightly augmented to emphasize his ancient power, while Xavier and Magneto's lines are often more naturalistic, grounded in emotion and clarity. In emotionally charged scenes, such as Magneto's confrontation with the workers who killed his family, ambient sound fades, allowing his voice and breathing to carry the emotional weight. Conversely, in battle sequences, dialogue is carefully mixed to remain intelligible without being overpowered by explosions or music. Environmental sounds throughout the film are textured and layered. Scenes in Cairo feature distant calls to prayer, street market chatter, and sand-blown wind, grounding the otherwise fantastical events in a tangible reality. Xavier's mansion includes subtle background noises, students talking, footsteps, doors creaking, which help bring the location to life as a lived-in space. These small auditory cues may go unnoticed consciously, but they contribute to the viewer's overall immersion in the film's world. A notable aspect of the sound design is how it interacts with pacing. During quieter character moments, the film leans into ambient or minimalist soundscapes, allowing the actors' performances to shine without excessive audio interference. However, as tension builds, the layering of sound intensifies, music swells, effects stack, and crescendos emerge, culminating in carefully orchestrated climaxes that align with both plot and character arcs. Upon its release in May 2016, X-Men: Apocalypse received a mixed to negative reception from both critics and audiences. While its production values, visual effects, and ensemble cast garnered praise, many reviewers criticized the film's narrative inconsistency, overcrowded character roster, and tonal imbalance. Its performance represented a turning point for the Fox-era X-Men franchise, signaling cracks in its storytelling momentum and shaping decisions about the series' future direction. From the critical standpoint, many reviewers applauded the ambition of the film's scale and its willingness to tackle mythic and thematic material. Oscar Isaac's performance as Apocalypse was often highlighted for lending gravitas and menace to the central villain. Likewise, the visual spectacle of the grand battle in Egypt and the Quicksilver rescue sequence were frequently cited as high points. Critics acknowledged the production design and effects work as impressive, but these elements were often seen as superficial without equally robust narrative depth. However, the film's ambitious scope was also identified as one of its primary weaknesses. Reviewers frequently pointed to the overabundance of characters and subplots, which diluted the emotional resonance of individual arcs. Newer mutants like Angel, Psylocke, and Jubilee were introduced hastily and given minimal development, leading many to describe them as cameos rather than fully realized characters. The core trio, Xavier, Magneto, and Mystique, received more screen time, but some critics felt their arcs were repetitive, reiterating themes from earlier films without offering fresh insight. The narrative itself drew criticism for its pacing and structure. Many observers considered the middle section of the film slow and exposition-heavy, riddled with dull setup scenes before the climactic showdowns. The tone reportedly shifted unevenly between dark, historical trauma in Magneto's storyline and lighter, comedic moments like those involving Quicksilver. This tonal whiplash, combined with narrative bloat, contributed to a sense that the film lacked a focused emotional center. Audience reactions followed a similar pattern. On major review aggregate sites, the film's score hovered in the mid-40s percentiles. Audiences described it as entertaining and visually striking but lacking in emotional cohesion or memorable storytelling. Some fans expressed frustration that the franchise seemed to be sacrificing character development for spectacle. While the Quicksilver scene became a beloved set piece, it also underscored the disconnect between visual ingenuity and narrative substance. Controversy also arose around certain story choices. Magneto's resurrection of human workers with metal powers was viewed by some as tonally questionable and emotionally manipulative. Others felt that Apocalypse himself was underused as a character. His ideology was clear, but his personal motivations and backstory were thinly sketched. Critics often compared him unfavorably to other comic book villains of similar stature, arguing that he lacked both nuance and charisma beyond his visual design. In terms of accolades, X-Men: Apocalypse received a few nominations for visual effects and costume design in genre awards and fan-focused accolades. It did not achieve major recognition from major film institutions, such as the Academy Awards or Golden Globes. The design of Apocalypse, the spectacle of the final battle, and some of the stunt work were all cited in technical award circles, but the film failed to resonate enough to generate nominations in the highest tiers of critical acclaim. Despite its flaws, the film was commercially successful. It opened with strong box office numbers domestically and internationally, though its global total eventually underperformed slightly relative to earlier entries like X-Men, Days of Future Past, or First Class. While still profitable, its financial performance raised questions about the sustainability of diminishing returns for the Fox X-Men franchise. The film grossed over $700 million worldwide, but it lagged behind expectations given its production scale and marketing. Critics and analysts interpreted the film's reception as a symptom of franchise fatigue. Many felt that by the time Apocalypse was released, the formula had become stale. Over-reliance on ensemble action, recycled themes of prejudice and generational conflict, and lack of narrative evolution led many to feel the story had plateaued. The film was frequently cited as a case study in how even successful franchise entries can become diluted by ambition without sufficient substance. Fan reception was divided. Some appreciated the spectacle, the expanded mutant universe, and the seeds of future stories implied by Jean Grey's transformation. Others were disappointed by the limited screen time for key characters and the feeling that many character arcs were cut short or incompletely explored. Comic book purists debated the portrayal of Apocalypse, arguing that the film's decision to depict him in an Egyptian context without deeper mythological context diminished the character's impact. Over time, retrospective appraisals have tended to view X-Men Apocalypse as one of the weaker entries in the Fox-era X-Men films, not because it lacked ambition, but because its scope outpaced its narrative coherence. Later commentary has positioned it as a necessary bridge between the earlier character-focused entries and the eventual corporate transition when the X-Men intellectual property moved to Disney. In that light, Apocalypse is often seen as a transitional film, a finale of a sort before the series' reinvention under future stewardship. Some critics have also reflected on how the film handled representation. While the attempt to bring greater diversity into the cast and character backgrounds was welcomed, many observed that these elements felt superficial or underdeveloped. Storm's origin referenced her African roots briefly, but deeper engagement with her heritage was largely absent. Nightcrawler's faith and identity were noted as unique inclusions, but not explored with nuance or care. In summary, the reception of X-Men Apocalypse was a mix of admiration for its visual ambition and disappointment in its narrative execution. Critics and audiences agreed on the craft, effects, design, and set pieces, but diverged on whether the story deserved the spectacle. Fans praised standout moments, but bemoaned a sense of emotional disconnect and character overcrowding. The film did well financially, but its middling critical reception and internal franchise fatigue contributed to a broader soul-searching about where the X-Men series should head next. The legacy of X-Men Apocalypse is as layered and complex as the film itself. While it may not be remembered as a critical darling or a pinnacle of the superhero genre, its influence, both direct and indirect, has had long-lasting effects on the X-Men film series, the broader superhero film landscape, and even studio decision-making during a transitional era in comic book adaptations. Its legacy is a paradox, a film that simultaneously signaled the decline of one phase of a franchise while laying the groundwork for a new era under different creative and corporate leadership. To understand the influence of Apocalypse, one must begin with its place in the X-Men timeline. As the third installment in the prequel trilogy that began with X-Men First Class, 2011, and reached a creative high with X-Men Days of Future Past, 2014, Apocalypse was tasked with continuing the momentum of a revitalized franchise. While First Class reinvented the characters with a youthful cast and Days of Future Past managed to merge timelines and fanbases, Apocalypse tried to push further by introducing a cosmic-scale villain and advancing long-standing storylines. However, where its predecessors succeeded in balancing character with spectacle, Apocalypse struggled to maintain the same emotional or thematic resonance, leaving audiences and critics with a sense of franchise fatigue. Despite its shortcomings, the film left a notable imprint on how future superhero films would be shaped, especially within the Fox framework. First, it prompted a reassessment of the franchise's direction. The reception to Apocalypse, in both commercial performance and fan response, was instrumental in pushing Fox toward a diversification of tone and style. This shift can be seen in subsequent projects like Logan, 2017, which took a gritty, character-driven approach far removed from the ensemble blockbuster template, and Deadpool, 2016, which embraced irreverent humor and meta-commentary. Both films marked a departure from the formulaic nature of Apocalypse and were hailed as innovative and fresh, largely in response to what Apocalypse was not. The legacy of Apocalypse also influenced Fox's desire to take more creative risks with its mutant properties. Though the film featured bold visual effects and attempted epic storytelling, its shortcomings revealed a growing disconnect between large-scale spectacle and intimate storytelling. This awareness led to experimental projects like The New Mutants, 2020, which, despite its own troubled production, attempted to blend superhero elements with horror, a genre mix that likely wouldn't have been greenlit if Apocalypse had been more universally embraced. Even in failure or misstep, Apocalypse served as a necessary learning point in Fox's X-Men journey. One of the more subtle legacies of Apocalypse was the deepening integration of comic-accurate visuals and character depictions. The film introduced more traditional costumes and designs, such as Psylocke's classic look and Storm's mohawk hairstyle, paying homage to the comic roots. While some criticized these as superficial or underutilized, they reflected a shift toward embracing the source material in a more literal way. This approach would continue in later films and eventually become a hallmark of Marvel Studios' adaptations, where even the most fantastical costumes and storylines are treated with a sense of fidelity and respect. In this way, Apocalypse was part of the transition toward normalizing comic book aesthetics in mainstream cinema. The portrayal of Jean Grey and the foreshadowing of the Phoenix Force in Apocalypse directly paved the way for Dark Phoenix, 2019, the next and final chapter in the main Fox X-Men saga. While Dark Phoenix was critically panned and commercially unsuccessful, its roots lie firmly in Apocalypse. Jean's unleashing of her latent power in the film's climax was meant to be both a narrative payoff and a teaser for future developments. Unfortunately, the underwhelming response to Apocalypse diminished anticipation for the follow-up, which suffered from multiple delays and a lack of fan enthusiasm. Nonetheless, the seeds planted in Apocalypse shaped the storyline direction and character focus of its successor. In a broader sense, Apocalypse is emblematic of a turning point in superhero cinema. Released in 2016, it arrived during a crowded year that also saw the release of Captain America, Civil War, Deadpool, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Doctor Strange. In that competitive environment, Apocalypse struggled to differentiate itself. Its conventional narrative structure and overstuffed plot paled in comparison to the focused conflict of Civil War or the genre-subverting tone of Deadpool. As a result, Apocalypse became a case study in how superhero fatigue could set in if storytelling innovation did not keep pace with audience expectations. Perhaps most significantly, the long-term legacy of Apocalypse is tied to the eventual acquisition of 21st Century Fox by the Walt Disney Company in 2019. Though the buyout was influenced by a range of corporate factors, the declining performance of the X-Men franchise, and particularly the disappointment surrounding Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, weighed heavily in the decision to consolidate the properties under a single umbrella. The absorption of the X-Men into the Marvel Cinematic Universe was made possible, in part, by the realization that Fox's version had reached a creative dead end. In that sense, Apocalypse was both a final chapter and a catalyst for rebirth. It marked the end of an era, clearing the path for a rebooted integration into a broader narrative ecosystem. In terms of merchandise and licensing, the film had limited impact compared to previous entries. While it generated the usual array of action figures, posters, and tie-in products, the enthusiasm surrounding Apocalypse did not translate into a merchandising phenomenon. The character of Apocalypse, despite his long-standing comic book presence, did not capture the imagination of younger audiences in the same way that Magneto or Wolverine had in previous installments. As a result, his appearance in games, collectibles, or other media was relatively muted, limiting his broader influence in the franchise's branding efforts. However, some aspects of the film did find resonance in fan communities. Cosplayers embraced the redesigned versions of Storm, Psylocke, and Magneto, and the film's Egypt-based finale became a popular setting in fan art and role-playing communities. Fan fiction and creative reinterpretations often focused on what the film could have been, rather than what it was, imagining deeper backstories for the Horsemen or expanding on Jean's transformation. This fan engagement, though modest compared to other Marvel properties, contributed to Apocalypse's lingering presence in the cultural imagination. Audience reflection on X-Men. Apocalypse has been diverse, shaped by differing expectations, emotional investments in the franchise, and broader cultural context. While the film may not have resonated universally, it sparked a wide range of interpretations, reactions, and emotional responses from viewers across generations and fan demographics. These reflections reveal not only how the film was perceived at the time of its release, but also how it has been remembered in the years since, as part of a complex relationship between viewers and the evolving superhero genre. One of the clearest takeaways from audience response to X-Men Apocalypse was the sense of franchise fatigue among longtime fans. For many who had followed the series since the early 2000s, the film felt like a continuation of familiar themes without sufficient novelty or character evolution. Viewers expressed that the repeated dynamics between Professor X, Magneto, and Mystique, though iconic, had begun to feel cyclical. The emotional stakes, once high in films like X2 or Days of Future Past, felt more muted and formulaic here. While some fans appreciated the continuation of these arcs, others voiced disappointment that the characters didn't seem to grow in new ways or reach meaningful conclusions. However, younger audiences who were introduced to the X-Men through the prequel series rather than the original trilogy had different perspectives. Many appreciated the new cast, particularly the younger versions of Jean Grey, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, and Storm. These characters resonated with teenage and young adult viewers who saw themselves reflected in their uncertainty, power struggles, and emotional development. Jean's climactic moment unleashing the Phoenix Force became especially powerful for audiences identifying with themes of repressed potential and personal transformation. These viewers often interpreted her arc as symbolic of mental health struggles, emotional awakening, and the fear of one's own inner strength. Quicksilver also emerged as a standout character for many viewers. His scene rescuing students from the exploding Xavier's school was widely regarded as one of the most entertaining and inventive moments in the film. Audiences appreciated his humor, kinetic energy, and underdog charm. For younger fans and casual moviegoers, this scene alone justified the price of admission. Quicksilver became a fan-favorite figure, an embodiment of joy, rebellion, and unconventional heroism in a film that otherwise leaned heavily on apocalyptic drama. For some fans, Apocalypse prompted reflections on the nature of power and control. The titular villain, though criticized for being one-dimensional by critics, struck a chord with viewers who saw his ideology as a cautionary tale about extremism and dehumanization. His desire to rebuild the world through destruction echoed themes present in contemporary political climates around the globe. Certain audience members interpreted Apocalypse as a metaphor for authoritarianism, religious fanaticism, or even technological overreach. These symbolic interpretations, though not always explicitly intended by the filmmakers, gave the film deeper meaning for viewers engaging with it through personal or philosophical lenses. Audiences from marginalized communities also brought unique interpretations to the film. Some viewers related strongly to the mutant metaphor as a symbol for discrimination, identity, and outsider status. Although Apocalypse did not explore these themes with the same depth as earlier entries like X2 or First Class, the presence of diverse characters still offered important representation. Storm's origin, while briefly addressed, gave viewers from African or Afro-diasporic backgrounds a point of connection. Similarly, Nightcrawler's gentle spirit and visible otherness resonated with neurodivergent and disabled viewers, who saw in him a reflection of their own experiences navigating a world that doesn't always understand difference. Mystique's role as a symbol of resistance and self-acceptance also struck a chord with fans. Her evolution from a villain in the original trilogy to a reluctant leader in the prequels was interpreted by many as emblematic of the internal conflict between societal expectation and personal identity. Viewers, particularly women and members of the LGBTQ+ community, connected with her journey of self-determination and moral ambiguity. Although some criticized her softened characterization in Apocalypse as too sanitized compared to her earlier rebellious persona, others viewed her leadership as a natural progression of someone trying to reconcile a complex past with a more hopeful future. Audience expectations also played a major role in shaping interpretations. Many viewers entered the theater with high hopes after the success of Days of Future Past, which balanced nostalgia, action, and emotional weight. When Apocalypse failed to match that impact, disappointment was a common reaction. Some interpreted this as evidence that the series had peaked, while others believed the film was misunderstood and deserved more credit for its ambitious scope. This division led to vibrant online debates, fan essays, and discussions about what makes an effective superhero narrative and how studios should treat beloved characters. There were also viewers who saw Apocalypse as a turning point, not just for the X-Men franchise, but for superhero cinema in general. For them, the film's formulaic approach underscored the limits of traditional franchise storytelling. This reflection sparked conversations about the need for more diversity in both story structure and character focus. Some fans began to clamor for films centered on lesser-known mutants, standalone character dramas, or genre hybrids, ideas that would later be explored in films like Logan and series like Legion. In this way, audience interpretation of Apocalypse helped influence broader discourse about the evolution of the superhero genre. Emotional reactions to the film also varied. Some viewers were genuinely moved by the emotional core of Magneto's storyline, particularly his attempt at a quiet life and the tragedy that pulls him back into violence. The death of his wife and daughter, though criticized for narrative convenience, hit home for many who have experienced sudden personal loss. Others were stirred by the sense of unity and camaraderie among the younger X-Men, which symbolized hope in the face of destruction. For viewers living through social, political, or personal uncertainty, these emotional undercurrents offered catharsis, even if the film's execution was uneven. Over time, X-Men: Apocalypse has undergone a kind of reevaluation among certain fan communities. While not widely regarded as a masterpiece, some fans argue that it deserves credit for its ambition and for offering character moments that stuck with them long after the credits rolled. Online, fans share GIFs, artwork, and analysis celebrating their favorite scenes, from Jean's transformation to Quicksilver's run to Magneto's return to vengeance. These ongoing conversations show that audience interpretation is not static. It evolves with time, perspective, and personal connection. Character development is often the backbone of any successful ensemble film, especially within a superhero saga where individual journeys intersect with greater stakes. In X-Men: Apocalypse, the narrative introduces, reintroduces, and evolves a wide array of characters, ranging from legendary mutants like Magneto and Professor X to new iterations of fan-favorite characters like Jean Grey, Cyclops, Storm, and Nightcrawler. While the film juggles a large cast, some arcs are more compelling than others, with varying degrees of emotional depth, transformation, and narrative payoff. One of the most emotionally rich and tragic arcs in the film belongs to Eric Lehnsherr, better known as Magneto. At the start of the movie, we see him attempting to lead a quiet, anonymous life in Poland, working in a steel factory and raising a family in peace. This version of Magneto is subdued and reflective, seemingly attempting to put his violent past behind him. It's a stark contrast to the militant, vengeful figure seen in previous films, and it speaks to a desire for healing and reinvention. However, this peace is shattered when his wife and daughter are killed after a misunderstanding about his identity as a mutant. The devastating loss triggers a return to his darker instincts, making him vulnerable to Apocalypse's influence. Magneto's arc is one of sorrow, manipulation, and rediscovery. His motivations are grounded in grief, and his eventual decision to side with Apocalypse stems from a belief that the world is inherently broken. What makes his arc compelling is the internal conflict he experiences. Even as he wields godlike power to reshape the planet, there's a lingering sense of regret and moral hesitation. In the climactic battle, it is ultimately not a show of strength, but an appeal to his humanity from Mystique and the younger X-Men that brings him back from the brink. His decision to turn against Apocalypse is not just a plot necessity, but a moment of redemption, symbolizing the enduring complexity of a character who exists in the gray between villainy and heroism. Professor Charles Xavier, meanwhile, undergoes a subtler but equally important transformation. While he begins the film in a position of stability, running his school and mentoring a new generation of mutants, he is forced to confront the cost of idealism. His pacifistic worldview is challenged when Apocalypse seeks to use his telepathy to destroy humanity. One of the most pivotal moments in Xavier's arc is when he is rendered helpless, mentally overpowered by Apocalypse, and literally stripped of his hair during the psychic battle. This transformation is symbolic, marking his evolution into the bald-headed Professor X that longtime fans know. The loss of his hair is more than cosmetic. It represents a rebirth, a shedding of innocence and naivete. Xavier also faces his past in the form of Moira MacTaggart, the human agent he once had a romantic relationship with and whose memory he erased for her protection. Their reunion brings an emotional thread that adds a layer of vulnerability to Xavier's usually stoic persona. His decision to restore her memories speaks to his growth and willingness to confront the consequences of his actions. His mentorship of Jean Grey, as well, reveals a more nurturing side, contrasting with his earlier portrayal as someone who sometimes suppresses his students' potential out of fear. His encouragement for Jean to let go and embrace her power is one of the film's most emotional payoffs. Jean Grey's development is arguably the most thematically significant arc in the film. Initially introduced as shy, uncertain, and feared even by her peers due to the immense, barely controlled power within her, Jean represents untapped potential and inner turmoil. Her journey is one of self-acceptance, empowerment, and identity. As the narrative progresses, we see her struggle not only with external threats but with her own self-doubt. This culminates in the film's climax, when she finally releases her full abilities and channels the Phoenix Force to help defeat Apocalypse. This moment is cathartic, especially for fans familiar with her comic book storyline. Jean's arc is about realizing she is not a danger to others, but a protector, and this sets the stage for her central role in Dark Phoenix. Scott Summers, or Cyclops, is introduced to the franchise and Apocalypse as a high school student just discovering his mutant abilities. His arc is that of initiation into his powers, into the X-Men team, and into leadership. Though his role is not as prominent as Jean's, he is shown evolving from a frightened, unsure teenager to a confident fighter. His brother Alex, Havoc, brings him to Xavier's school, and his death in the explosion that destroys the mansion serves as a turning point for Scott, marking the moment he transitions from reactive to proactive. His bond with Jean also begins to form in this film, offering an emotional anchor that will develop further in later entries. Kurt Wagner, or Nightcrawler, is another new addition in Apocalypse, portrayed as a gentle, innocent figure with deep religious conviction and a desire to do good. His arc is not so much about transformation as it is about discovery. He finds a new home among the X-Men and demonstrates courage and empathy in battle. While his character is somewhat underused, his presence adds to the team's emotional diversity and reinforces the mutant metaphor of difference and belonging. Aurora Monroe, or Storm, experiences a compelling if somewhat rushed arc introduced as a young Cairo street thief. She is initially seduced by Apocalypse's promise of power and transformation. Her admiration for Mystique, who is seen as a symbol of mutant empowerment, becomes a key influence in her eventual defection from Apocalypse's side. Her journey is one of choosing her role model and identity. While her turn against Apocalypse is quick, it sets the groundwork for her evolution into a hero. Her arc symbolizes the struggle many young people face in choosing who they want to become in a world full of competing ideologies. Psylocke and Angel, who round out the four horsemen of Apocalypse, receive the least development. Psylocke, while visually striking and powerful, remains emotionally distant and underexplored. Her motivations for joining Apocalypse are vague, and her limited dialogue offers little insight into her inner world. Angel begins the film in a German underground fight club, and after being transformed into Archangel, he functions more as a tool than a character. Both arcs represent missed opportunities, as each character has rich comic book backstories that could have added complexity to the narrative. Mystique's arc is one of reluctant leadership. Following the events of Days of Future Past, she has become a symbol of mutant resistance, though she herself resists that role. She prefers anonymity and independence, but circumstances force her into a leadership position, especially with the younger mutants. Her evolution from assassin to mentor is one of the film's quieter but more significant developments. She struggles with identity, legacy, and purpose, ultimately embracing the responsibility of shaping the next generation of X-Men. Her mentoring of Nightcrawler, Jean, and Cyclops positions her as a maternal figure, a far cry from her earlier, more self-serving incarnations. Costume and set design play crucial roles in establishing the tone, time period, character identities, and mood of X-Men: Apocalypse. As a film that bridges the late 1970s and early 1980s with a larger-than-life superhero fantasy, the visual choices in clothing and environment provide rich layers of storytelling. The production design, led by key creative personnel, works to ground the film's fantastical elements in a recognizable era while simultaneously emphasizing the distinctiveness of mutants and their powers. The costumes and sets do more than just look good. They inform character motivations, relationships, and the overall narrative texture. Starting with costumes, the film notably departs from the leather-heavy, dark-toned aesthetics of earlier X-Men films in favor of a palette and style reflective of the late 1970s. This period setting is evident in the clothing worn by the human characters and the civilian identities of mutants before they assume their heroic personas. The costumes exhibit a blend of practical workwear, casual street fashion, and early 80s flair, including earth tones, denim jackets, patterned shirts, and vintage athletic wear. These choices anchor the story in a tangible time and place, helping audiences immediately situate themselves in the era. For the mutants, costumes function on several levels. They signal transformation, empowerment, and group identity. One of the most discussed aspects is the design of the X-Men's uniforms. Unlike the more stylized, colorful suits from the comics, the film opts for functional, tactical outfits that prioritize realism and utility. This choice reflects the film's attempt to balance superhero spectacle with grounded storytelling. For example, the X-Men's suits incorporate muted colors with subtle hints of blue and yellow, the franchise's iconic comic book colors, but are primarily composed of textured fabrics, armor plating, and streamlined designs that suggest combat readiness. This approach makes the mutants feel like operatives engaged in a dangerous mission rather than costumed heroes, underscoring the gravity of their struggle. Jean Grey's costume marks a turning point in her character development. At first, she wears simple, casual clothing that reflects her introverted and conflicted nature. However, after her transformation into the Phoenix, her appearance shifts dramatically. The costume design uses fiery hues and sleek, almost ethereal fabrics that convey both power and danger. The visual metaphor of fire and rebirth is echoed in her outfit's evolution, symbolizing her emergence as a force beyond mortal control. This costume is significant because it visually represents her identity crisis and ultimate acceptance of her power. Magneto's costumes also play a pivotal role in signaling his journey. At the film's outset, Eric Lehnsherr wears nondescript clothing, a gray work shirt and simple trousers that reflects his attempt to blend into society and live a quiet life. This downplayed appearance contrasts sharply with his later transformation into the armored, imposing figure associated with his comic book persona. The helmet, a signature element designed to protect his mind from telepathic intrusion, is more than functional. It symbolizes his emotional armor, his withdrawal from vulnerability, and his acceptance of his darker side. The costume's evolution, from humble worker to vengeful warrior, mirrors his tragic narrative arc. The Four Horsemen's costumes are intentionally theatrical and symbolic. Apocalypse transforms them with body modifications, glowing tattoos, and futuristic armor that set them apart visually from the X-Men and other characters. Psylocke's sleek, form-fitting costume and striking purple hair are designed to highlight her lethal agility and psychic powers, reinforcing her role as a deadly warrior. Angel's metallic wings, enhanced through both costume and CGI, are a dramatic and terrifying visual statement, marking his transformation into a being torn between humanity and monstrous power. Storm's costume, although less flashy than the others, blends traditional African elements with a punk edge, reflecting her dual identity as both a street survivor and a future goddess of weather. These costumes emphasize their servitude to Apocalypse while also expressing their individual mutant identities. Mystique's costume continues her iconic look from previous films, with her striking blue skin, scales, and yellow eyes. The decision to keep her in her mutant form for much of the film underscores her rejection of human disguise and embraces her identity as a mutant leader. Her look conveys a powerful message about self-acceptance and the politics of appearance, resonating with the film's broader themes of identity and transformation. In terms of makeup and prosthetics, the film invested heavily in realistic, high-quality effects to bring mutants to life. Nightcrawler's blue skin, glowing eyes, and pointed tail are achieved through a combination of makeup and digital effects, balancing believability with fantasy. His costume design complements this with a simple, almost monk-like tunic that emphasizes his gentle nature despite his demonic appearance. Similarly, Apocalypse's own makeup, which transforms Oscar Isaac into a towering godlike figure with ancient Egyptian motifs, was a significant undertaking. The layered prosthetics and CGI enhancements gave the character an otherworldly presence, reinforcing his status as a nearly immortal being. Moving on to set design, the film showcases a variety of locations that serve narrative and symbolic purposes. The opening sequence takes place in ancient Egypt, with sets that evoke grandeur, mysticism, and the dawn of Apocalypse's power. These sets combine historical aesthetics with futuristic design elements, blending past and future to emphasize the character's timeless nature. The use of large-scale pyramids, underground tombs, and massive halls filled with hieroglyphics grounds the mythic origins of the villain in an evocative visual context. The 1980s setting features several key locations that define the story's emotional and physical landscape. The Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, though damaged and in ruins for much of the film, remains a central hub for character interaction and the mutant community. The set balances institutional design, reminiscent of a private school or university, with a home-like warmth, reflecting the dual role of the mansion as both a sanctuary and a training ground. The destruction of the mansion in the film is a visual and narrative turning point, symbolizing the loss of innocence and the fracturing of the mutant family. The film also features urban environments that highlight the socio-political tensions of the era. Scenes set in Cairo showcase bustling marketplaces, narrow alleys, and the struggles of street life, reflecting the gritty reality Storm comes from. The Fight Club where Angel is found adds to this gritty, underground aesthetic, using industrial sets, harsh lighting, and chaotic energy to emphasize the brutal nature of his world before transformation. The screenplay and dialogue of X-Men, Apocalypse play a vital role in shaping the film's narrative flow, character interactions, and overall tone. Written by Simon Kinberg, who also produced and contributed to previous X-Men films, the script attempts to weave a complex story that balances multiple characters, dramatic arcs, and blockbuster action sequences. Given the film's large ensemble cast and ambitious scope, the script's strengths and weaknesses become particularly evident in its dialogue and structure, affecting audience engagement and emotional resonance. One of the defining features of the screenplay is its effort to blend exposition with character development. Because Apocalypse is a sequel and a prequel of sorts, it carries the burden of explaining the origins of some mutants while progressing the stories of others. The dialogue often serves as a vehicle to communicate key backstory details, such as the history of Apocalypse himself, the nature of mutant powers, and the political tensions within mutant and human communities. Unfortunately, this exposition-heavy writing sometimes leads to scenes that feel overly instructive or forced, disrupting the natural flow of conversation. Despite these challenges, the script includes moments of genuine character insight. For example, the interactions between Professor Xavier and Jean Grey reveal tenderness and concern that deepen their mentor-student relationship. The dialogue in these moments is understated but effective, capturing Jean's internal struggle with her burgeoning power and Xavier's protective instincts. Similarly, Magneto's scenes contain some of the film's most compelling lines, particularly when he confronts his loss and disillusionment with humanity. His dialogue oscillates between bitter cynicism and tragic vulnerability, giving the character a textured voice amidst the larger spectacle. The villain Apocalypse, however, is given relatively little dialogue, relying instead on his intimidating presence and cryptic pronouncements. This choice reinforces his portrayal as an ancient, godlike figure who speaks in grand, prophetic tones. While this suits his character conceptually, it also limits opportunities for nuanced villainy or dynamic verbal exchanges with the heroes. The lack of conversational interaction with Apocalypse sometimes makes the character feel distant or one-dimensional, reducing the emotional stakes of his conflict with the X-Men. The dialogue between the younger mutants, Cyclops, Jean, Nightcrawler, and Storm, is a mix of awkward teenage exchanges and moments of camaraderie. These scenes attempt to inject humor and levity into the narrative, which is otherwise heavy with existential themes and apocalyptic threats. However, some of these lines can feel stilted or cliched, as if struggling to capture the authentic voice of youth. The film's attempts at humor range from subtle banter to broad jokes, with varying degrees of success. This unevenness in tone sometimes undermines the emotional weight of certain scenes or disrupts pacing. Memorable lines do exist in the script, though none reach the iconic status of earlier franchise quotes. Phrases like Magneto's declaration about humanity's cruelty or Xavier's encouragement to embrace one's true self carry thematic significance. Additionally, the film uses some classic comic book references and nods, such as the mention of mutant kind and the coded use of the phrase gene to allude to mutant heritage. These moments reward longtime fans and enrich the film's mythos. In terms of script structure, X-Men Apocalypse follows a traditional three-act format with clear setup, confrontation, and resolution phases. The first act introduces the threat and reestablishes key characters. The second act focuses on Apocalypse's recruitment of the Four Horsemen and the mutants' training and internal conflicts. The final act culminates in the climactic battle in Egypt and the mansion's destruction. While this structure provides a familiar narrative arc, it also contributes to a sometimes predictable pacing, where major plot points are telegraphed early and tension ebbs and flows unevenly. Exposition is often delivered through direct dialogue rather than showing or subtly integrating information into the visual storytelling. For instance, Moira MacTaggart's dialogue explaining the history of Apocalypse or Xavier's explanation of mutant powers tends to be straightforward and didactic. While necessary to orient audiences, these scenes slow the pace and occasionally feel like lectures rather than organic conversations. This is a common challenge in superhero films that carry heavy lore, but the script's reliance on verbal exposition could have been balanced more skillfully with action or visual cues. The script also uses dialogue to explore themes of identity, power, and destiny. Characters frequently grapple with questions about their nature and place in the world, and these philosophical musings are expressed through reflective monologues or dialogues. For example, Jean's struggle to control the Phoenix Force is articulated through conversations with Xavier and Mystique, where fears of losing oneself clash with desires for acceptance. Magneto's monologues about survival and evolution raise questions about the cost of vengeance and the nature of justice. These moments elevate the screenplay beyond simple action fare, providing emotional depth. One notable aspect of the dialogue is its occasional use of humor to humanize characters and alleviate tension. For example, Nightcrawler's gentle, almost naive comments contrast with his demonic appearance, creating moments of levity. Cyclops' awkwardness and tentative leadership style lead to some self-deprecating humor. Mystique's sardonic remarks and dry wit also add flavor. However, these lighter moments are unevenly distributed and sometimes feel out of place within the otherwise grave tone of the film. In terms of scriptwriting technique, the pacing of conversations varies throughout the film. Some scenes feature quick exchanges that maintain momentum, such as training montages or battle preparations. Others slow down to focus on emotional beats or philosophical discussions, like Xavier and Moira's reunion. While these shifts help differentiate scene purposes, transitions between fast and slow pacing occasionally feel abrupt, disrupting narrative flow. The script also employs several classic superhero tropes and motifs. The theme of chosen family is evident in the formation of the mutant team, while the struggle against a world that fears and hates mutants is a recurring undercurrent. The film's climax hinges on the trope of ultimate power unleashed and the hero's collective efforts to overcome a near-unstoppable villain. While these elements are familiar, the script attempts to inject freshness through character-specific stakes and emotional resonance. Overall, the screenplay of X-Men Apocalypse balances the demands of a sprawling ensemble action movie with the desire to explore complex themes and character relationships. It excels in moments of character-driven dialogue that reveal inner conflicts and motivations, particularly with Magneto, Xavier, and Jean Grey. However, it struggles with exposition-heavy scenes, uneven humor, and occasional stilted exchanges among younger characters. The dialogue supports the film's epic ambitions, but sometimes falls short of fully realizing the emotional potential of the story. The marketing and promotional campaign for X-Men Apocalypse was a major undertaking that sought to capitalize on the popularity of the X-Men franchise while distinguishing this installment through its unique story, characters, and setting. Released in 2016, the film entered a highly competitive summer blockbuster season, which necessitated a carefully planned and multifaceted marketing strategy designed to attract both hardcore fans and new audiences. The campaign employed a mix of traditional advertising, digital outreach, fan engagement, merchandise tie-ins, and innovative promotional tactics, reflecting the evolving landscape of film marketing in the mid-2010s. One of the first steps in the promotional effort was the strategic release of trailers and teaser materials. The initial teaser trailer, unveiled nearly a year before the film's release, focused heavily on building anticipation by introducing the central villain, Apocalypse, portrayed by Oscar Isaac. The teaser avoided revealing too much of the plot, instead relying on striking visual effects, ominous music, and cryptic dialogue to create intrigue. The use of slow reveals and shadowy imagery highlighted Apocalypse's mythic status and immense power, setting a tone of epic stakes. This teaser was widely shared on social media platforms, generating buzz among fan communities and entertainment media. Following the teaser, a full-length trailer debuted several months later, offering a more detailed glimpse of the story and characters. This trailer emphasized the ensemble nature of the film, showcasing not only Apocalypse, but also the younger mutants such as Cyclops, Jean Grey, Storm, and Nightcrawler. The marketing team cleverly balanced action sequences with character moments to appeal to different audience segments. The trailer also featured the destruction of the Xavier Mansion and the transformation of the Four Horsemen, visually signaling high stakes and dramatic conflict. The soundtrack choice for the trailer, often a popular rock or orchestral piece, enhanced the epic feel. In addition to trailers, the film's marketing utilized traditional poster campaigns. The official posters were designed to highlight the main characters and the film's dark, apocalyptic themes. One notable poster featured Apocalypse looming over the X-Men with glowing eyes and his imposing figure dominating the frame. Another poster focused on the Four Horsemen, each depicted with their distinctive powers and costumes, creating a sense of menace and anticipation. These posters appeared in cinemas, on billboards, in magazines, and across online platforms, reinforcing the film's visual identity. Social media played an increasingly significant role in the promotion of X-Men Apocalypse. The film's official accounts on platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram regularly posted behind-the-scenes photos, character profiles, and countdowns to release. Interactive campaigns invited fans to participate in quizzes and share fan art or cosplay images, fostering a sense of community and engagement. The studio also partnered with influencers and fan sites to amplify word of mouth and ensure that the film remained visible in online conversations. Another innovative promotional tactic was the release of a virtual reality (VR) experience tied to the film. This immersive marketing effort allowed fans to explore the world of the mutants and Apocalypse's lair through VR headsets, providing a unique way to engage with the story and characters beyond traditional media. The VR experience received attention for its use of cutting-edge technology and helped differentiate Apocalypse's campaign from other superhero movies. Merchandising was a major component of the film's marketing strategy. Licensed products ranged from action figures and collectible statues to clothing, accessories, and video games. Toy manufacturers released detailed figures of Apocalypse and the Four Horsemen, often with special features like removable parts or light-up elements. Apparel lines included t-shirts, hoodies, and hats featuring the film's logo and character imagery. These merchandise efforts not only served as additional revenue streams, but also reinforced brand visibility and fan loyalty. The promotional campaign also leveraged cross-promotions and partnerships with major brands. Fast food chains offered themed meal toys and packaging, while retailers hosted special in-store displays and exclusive product launches. The film's release coincided with a surge of X-Men comic reprints and new issues, timed to create synergy between the cinematic and comic book worlds. These cross-promotions helped maintain interest among core fans and introduce the franchise to younger audiences. Premieres and fan events formed another pillar of the marketing push. The world premiere, held in Los Angeles, was a high-profile event attended by the cast, crew, and media, generating significant press coverage. In the weeks leading up to release, the studio organized fan screenings and Q&A sessions with actors and filmmakers, which were streamed live to engage global audiences. Comic-Con panels and appearances by cast members offered deeper dives into the film's making and characters, serving as both promotional and celebratory occasions for the fandom. Critical to the marketing success was the timing of the release date. Positioned in late May 2016, the film entered the summer blockbuster window, traditionally reserved for big-budget tentpole movies. This timing allowed X-Men Apocalypse to benefit from increased movie-going during the season, but also meant it faced stiff competition from other franchises. The studio supported the release with a well-coordinated media blitz, including TV spots, interviews, and featurettes aired on entertainment networks. One of the challenges in the marketing was managing fan expectations, given the mixed reception of the previous installment, X-Men: Days of Future Past. The promotional materials sought to reassure audiences that Apocalypse would deliver on action, character depth, and spectacle. By highlighting the return of beloved characters alongside new mutants and the introduction of a powerful villain, the campaign balanced nostalgia with novelty. In summary, the marketing and promotional campaign for X-Men Apocalypse was comprehensive and multifaceted, combining traditional advertising, digital outreach, immersive experiences, merchandising, and fan engagement. It leveraged the strengths of the franchise while adapting to contemporary marketing trends, aiming to build excitement and ensure a strong box office performance. Although the film's reception was mixed, the promotional efforts were praised for their creativity and scope, illustrating how major Hollywood productions navigate the complex demands of modern audience engagement. Comparing X-Men Apocalypse to other films in the X-Men franchise, earlier adaptations, and similar superhero movies reveals much about its distinct place within the broader landscape of comic book cinema. Directed by Bryan Singer, who also helmed X-Men 2000 and X2 2003, Apocalypse represents an attempt to blend elements of a reboot and a sequel by continuing the storyline from X-Men: Days of Future Past 2014, while exploring earlier origins of key characters. This dual nature impacts its tone, style, and storytelling in ways that differentiate it from other entries in the series and from contemporaneous superhero films. Beginning with a comparison to its immediate predecessor, Days of Future Past, Apocalypse shares several cast members and continues the exploration of mutant identity and conflict with humanity. However, where Days of Future Past was widely praised for its innovative time travel narrative, tight pacing, and effective blending of old and new casts, Apocalypse received more mixed reviews due to a denser plot and a larger ensemble, which some critics felt led to less focused storytelling. The former's narrative complexity and emotional stakes set a high bar that Apocalypse struggled to meet consistently. Stylistically, Apocalypse leans heavily into spectacle, with grandiose set pieces, extensive CGI, and a darker, more apocalyptic tone. This contrasts with Days of Future Past, which, while also featuring large-scale action, balanced spectacle with moments of intimate character drama. The tonal difference illustrates Singer's shift toward a more traditional blockbuster formula in Apocalypse, favoring visual spectacle over nuanced character exploration at times. In the context of the overall X-Men film series, Apocalypse attempts to serve as both an origin story for younger versions of key characters and a continuation of existing plotlines. This places it in a unique position compared to earlier films such as X-Men 2000, X2 2003, and X-Men: The Last Stand 2006. The earlier movies, particularly the first two directed by Singer, are often lauded for their coherent storytelling and strong character focus. In contrast, Apocalypse incorporates a broader mythology involving ancient mutants and apocalyptic themes, drawing on comic book lore but complicating the narrative. This ambition sometimes overwhelms the clarity and pacing that characterized the earlier films. When compared to X-Men: First Class 2011, directed by Matthew Vaughn, which successfully revitalized the franchise with a fresh cast, 1960s setting, and sleek style, Apocalypse has a more sprawling and less cohesive narrative. First Class was praised for its sharp script, strong character chemistry, and a balanced tone blending drama and humor. Apocalypse attempts similar elements, but with a darker, more serious atmosphere and a heavier reliance on spectacle. While it introduces intriguing characters like Psylocke and Nightcrawler, their development is less fully realized than in First Class. Looking at other superhero films from the same era provides further points of comparison. For example, Marvel Studios' Captain America: Civil War 2016, released the same year as Apocalypse, was widely praised for its complex character dynamics, political themes, and tightly woven plot. It skillfully juggled an ensemble cast while maintaining clear stakes and emotional depth. Apocalypse, by contrast, was often seen as more focused on visual effects and less successful at managing its large cast or developing interpersonal relationships, which affected its emotional impact. Another relevant comparison is with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice 2016, which, like Apocalypse, dealt with godlike beings and apocalyptic stakes. Both films faced criticism for heavy-handed plotting and an overemphasis on spectacle over character development. However, Batman v Superman was marked by a darker, more brooding tone, whereas Apocalypse incorporated moments of youthful energy and humor, although unevenly. The reception of both films underscored the challenges of balancing blockbuster expectations with nuanced storytelling. In terms of directorial style, Bryan Singer's influence is clear in Apocalypse, especially in his preference for large set pieces and complex mythology. However, the film also reflects a shift in tone from his earlier X-Men works, with a more bombastic and sometimes uneven style. This contrasts with the more polished and coherent narrative style of Matthew Vaughn's First Class or the meticulous character-driven approach of Days of Future Past, which Singer also directed. When considering adaptations of the X-Men comics more broadly, Apocalypse draws heavily from the Age of Apocalypse storyline and other classic arcs that feature the villain as a nearly omnipotent mutant threatening the world. While previous films hinted at this mythology, Apocalypse attempts a fuller realization but struggles to balance fidelity to the source material with cinematic pacing and accessibility. This contrasts with the original X-Men trilogy, which adapted more contained stories with clearer character focus. The portrayal of Apocalypse himself also invites comparison. Unlike the comics, where Apocalypse is often a philosophical villain with complex motivations, the film's version is more straightforwardly malevolent and godlike. This simplification, while effective for spectacle, diminishes the character's depth compared to other on-screen comic villains like Loki from the Marvel Cinematic Universe or even Magneto within the X-Men series, who is consistently portrayed with moral ambiguity. The film's visual effects and CGI-heavy action sequences can also be compared to those in other superhero movies of the 2010s. While impressive in scale, some critics and fans noted that the CGI sometimes appeared excessive or detracted from the grounded feel established in earlier X-Men films. This contrasts with the practical effects and more restrained use of CGI in films like Logan, 2017, which was praised for its gritty realism and emotional storytelling. In terms of character dynamics, Apocalypse places a heavier focus on the relationships between younger mutants, exploring their coming-of-age struggles. This focus is reminiscent of the X-Men animated series and some comic runs, but is less pronounced in earlier films. While this was a strength, The limited runtime and broad focus sometimes prevented these arcs from achieving full emotional resonance. In conclusion, X-Men Apocalypse occupies a unique but somewhat divisive position within the X-Men film canon and the superhero genre at large. It attempts to marry the grand mythological stakes of classic comic book arcs with blockbuster spectacle and ensemble storytelling. Compared to earlier X-Men films, it is more ambitious in scope, but less consistent in tone and narrative coherence. When measured against contemporaneous superhero films, it demonstrates both the challenges and limitations of sustaining a large franchise with complex characters and lore. Ultimately, Apocalypse serves as a bridge between the franchise's past and future, with its strengths and weaknesses reflecting the transitional nature of comic book cinema in the mid-2010s.